The Leafs were up by 1 in the third period when Rochelle walked into the living room and turned off the television. Not down, off. No, excuse me. No, do you mind? Just her hand on the remote I was holding, and then silence where there had been a hockey game. I need the space, she said, not looking at me, already pulling her yoga mat from behind the couch that had sat in my living room for 14 years. Curtis set this up for my evening routine. The screen bothers my focus. For a second, I thought she was joking. That kind of joke where you wait for the person to laugh. She didn't laugh. She unrolled the mat. I can keep the volume low, I said. She looked at me then, just briefly. The way you look at someone who isn't quite understanding the situation. I'd really appreciate it if you watched in your room. Your room, not the bedroom. My room. Like I was a lodger who'd overstayed his welcome in someone else's place. I set the remote on the side table. My knees complained when I stood. They've been doing that since my early 50s, arthritis slow and persistent as a Hamilton winter. I walked to the hallway. Curtis was in the kitchen making a sandwich. He'd heard every word. Our house isn't big, a 2-story brick semi in the East End, bought in 1988 when you could still do that on a machinist's wages. Sound travels. He kept his eyes on the bread. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, not hard, just enough to feel it click. Sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to the silence where the game used to be. I don't know what the final score was. I still don't. Looking back now, the yoga mat wasn't the beginning. I understand that. It was just the moment I finally stopped explaining things away. 7 months earlier, Curtis had called me on a Wednesday evening. I remember because I was cleaning out the gutters along the back of the house, a job I'd been putting off since late September. The latter felt more uncertain than it used to. Dorothy would have told me to pay someone. She'd been gone 2 years by then. 2 years and 4 months. Dad. His voice had that particular tension in it, the kind that tries to sound casual and doesn't quite manage it. Hey, Kurt, what's going on? He explained it slowly. The warehouse had moved to a new labor contract. His guaranteed hours had been cut from 45 down to 28 a week. Rochelle worked remotely for a marketing company, part-time, contract basis. Their lease in Stony Creek was ending in January. They'd looked at other rentals. Everything decent near Hamilton was running $1,800, $2,000 a month. And with his reduced hours, the numbers simply didn't work. We just need somewhere temporary, he said. 3 months, maybe 4. I told him to come home. I didn't hesitate. He's my son. The house had been paid off since 2009. There was plenty of room. And the truth was, since Dorothy passed, the place had gotten quiet in a way I hadn't quite prepared myself for. The first few weeks after she died, the quiet felt respectful, like the house understood. Then it started feeling heavier. Some mornings I'd come downstairs and stand in the kitchen for a long moment before remembering there was no one to make coffee for but myself. I'd started turning on the radio in the workshop just for the sound of voices. Human voices, any voices. So when Curtis and Rochelle moved in at the start of February, part of me was genuinely relieved. Shoes by the front door again. Someone else's alarm going off in the morning. The smell of a different shampoo in the bathroom. The house felt alive again in a way it hadn't in a while. For the first month, it was easy. The second was mostly fine. The third was when the small things started. Small things are deceptive. You barely feel them individually. It's only when you add them up later that you understand what was happening. One afternoon I came back from Canadian Tire and found Dorothy's wingback chair gone from the sitting room. She'd had it reupholstered in 2016, sage green fabric, her choice entirely. It had sat by the front window for a decade. It made the room feel cluttered, Rochelle said. She was cheerful about it. I moved it to the basement. More flow this way. I nodded. Let it go, not worth the argument. 3 weeks later, my workshop in the garage had been reorganized. Every tool on the pegboard moved to a different hook. My socket sets rearranged by some system I didn't recognize. When I asked, Rachel said she'd read that an organized workspace improved productivity. She'd done it as a favor. A favor. Then Dorothy's things started disappearing from the surfaces of the house. The amber vase she'd kept on the kitchen windowsill for 20 years. The framed cross-stitch, a farmhouse scene, something her mother had made, that had hung in the hallway, a collection of old seed catalogs she'd saved because she liked the illustrations. One morning I found them in boxes, in the spare room closet. Rochelle was standing in the kitchen when I came out. "I hope that's okay," she said. The aesthetic was a little dated. Dated. The house Dorothy and I had built together over 35 years. Our choices, our accumulations, our particular version of home. I said nothing, put the kettle on, made my tea. I kept telling myself she wasn't malicious. She was young and stressed and terrified in a housing market that had made her generation feel like ownership was something that happened to other people. I'd seen her on calls at 10 o'clock at night. The anxiety was real. I knew that. But people don't need to be cruel to do damage. Sometimes they simply stop seeing you, and that's what was happening. Slowly, steadily, I was becoming less a person and more an inconvenience. Around April, I noticed something changing in Curtis, too. He started agreeing with everything Rachel said. Every adjustment to the house, every preference she expressed. Curtis found reasons to support it. And whenever I raised anything at all, I got some version of the same sentence. "Dad, it's not a big deal. Dad, she's just trying to make it feel like home. Dad, let it go." I heard those phrases so often they started losing their shape. Just sounds, really. Filler for the space where a response should have been. One evening in May, I sat in the garage after everyone had gone inside. The place smelled like motor oil and sawdust. I was staring at a pair of old hockey skates hanging from a nail on the wall. Curtis's. He'd have been 11 or 12 when I bought them. We'd driven to the outdoor rink on Parkdale every Saturday that winter, 6:30 a.m., breath fogging in the cold. He'd fall down and get up again without a word of complaint. That kind of kid. I missed him. Not the man standing in the kitchen looking at his bread. The boy who got up on a January morning without being asked. The warning from outside the house came from Vera Hutchins. She'd lived across the street since 1995. She and Dorothy used to walk together every Tuesday morning, all weather, all year. She still brings me shortbread at Christmas. I was checking the mailbox one afternoon when she called to me from her driveway. "Everything okay over there, Earl?" "Can't complain." She hesitated. "I ran into Rochelle at Loblaws last week." A pause. "She mentioned you'd moved in with them." I stood there, holding a hydro bill and a flyer for Eva Strew cleaning. "Moved in with them," I repeated. Vera looked at her keys. Maybe I misunderstood. She hadn't. I knew she hadn't. 'Cause 2 days later I overheard Rochelle on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't listening. I was walking past the doorway. "Yeah, it's been an adjustment," she was saying. "We're kind of managing things for him right now." Managing things for me. I kept walking. Went into the workshop and stood there a while with the light off. Then came the Kijiji listing. I'd been looking online for a set of shelf brackets. The old pressed steel kind they don't make anymore. And somewhere in the browsing, I ended up on the local listings. I was scrolling when I recognized something. Dorothy's bread box, hand-painted, pale blue, with a small chip on the corner she'd always meant to touch up, a gift from her aunt at our wedding. I'd grown up seeing that box on the counter every morning of my adult life. I clicked on it. The seller was listed as Rochelle T. Hamilton, asking $45. My hands went very still on the keyboard. I kept looking. Dorothy's grandmother's china, a tea service, 12 pieces, photographed on my kitchen table. A small oil painting she'd bought from a gallery in Elora on our anniversary trip in 2011. A handmade quilt from the spare room that her sister had sewn years ago. $40, $60, $30. All of it, listed without asking, without telling me, without permission. For the first time, I wasn't hurt. I was angry. And that anger was still sitting in my chest 3 days later on the evening of the hockey game, when Rochelle walked into my living room and turned off the television. I didn't act on impulse the next morning. I want to be clear about that. The morning after the yoga mat incident, I woke before 6, old workshop habit, and sat in the kitchen in the dark with a Tim Hortons double-double I'd made the night before and reheated. I watched the backyard slowly become visible through the window, the maple tree, the stone path Dorothy and I had laid one August, the empty garden beds, waiting. Then I picked up the phone. The number belonged to Judith Marsh. She'd been my solicitor since 2007, had handled the estate work after Dorothy passed. Plain-spoken woman, didn't waste your time. When she answered, I told her what I'd seen on Kijiji. Told her about the chair, the reorganizations, the overheard phone call. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. Do you want to do something about this? Or do you want to feel better about it? Both, I said. Good, I'll make some calls. After I hung up, I sat quietly for another few minutes. Then I looked up the number for 2 men in a truck. The woman who answered asked when I needed the truck. I looked at the calendar. Thursday. Curtis and Rochelle both out of the house by 8:30. Thursday, I said. 9 o'clock. That's pretty quick. I know. She paused. We can do that. What are we moving? I looked around the kitchen. The bread box was gone from the counter. Dorothy's cross-stitch was gone from the hallway. The wingback chair was in the basement. Everything that's mine, I said. The crew arrived just after 9. 3 guys, orange shirts, white truck. The lead man introduced himself as David. Firm handshake. He looked around the front room. What are we moving today? I told him to start with the easy things. Boxes I'd already packed. Personal records. My tools from the workshop. The framed photographs from the bedroom. Then we got to the harder parts. Dorothy's wingback chair came up from the basement first. It looked wrong down there, pushed into a corner next to the camping gear. When the guys carried it out into the daylight, something in me quietly unwound. The oil painting from Alora came off the wall in the spare room. I wrapped it myself. Took more time than it needed to. Around 10:30, we reached Dorothy's cedar chest at the foot of the bed. It had been there since the day we moved in. She'd polished it every spring with beeswax. I could still smell it if I pressed my palm to the lid and held still. One of the movers waited while I did exactly that. You need a minute, sir? No, I said, let's take it. At noon, I sat on the front steps eating a sandwich from the subway on Barton Street. Turkey, no mayo. My doctor had made his feelings clear about cholesterol. The movers were in the garage. I watched them dismantle the wooden workbench Curtis and I had built together 20 years ago. He'd been 16. Neither of us had really known what we were doing. We'd watched a few videos online and still managed to get it slightly crooked. We'd laughed about the crookedness every year since. They took it down carefully. I was grateful for that. At 2 o'clock, Judith called. I spoke with a colleague this morning, a contractor friend. He mentioned he'd had a meeting recently. A woman inquiring about renovation permits for a property on Gage Avenue North. I sat up straighter. What kind of renovation? A pause. She'd asked about converting an existing bedroom into a dedicated home workspace. Proper electrical, separate HVAC zone, soundproofing. Another pause. She'd also submitted an inquiry to the city about a potential rear addition, second-story extension. On my property, I said. Yes. The contractor assumed it was a family project, that everyone was on the same page. Judith's voice was steady. He also mentioned she'd asked whether the main floor bedroom, the front one, could be converted without disrupting the existing structure. The room where Dorothy and I had slept for 33 years. The room where I'd held her hand in the last weeks, where she'd taken her last breath on a Tuesday morning in October, maple leaves blowing past the window, the radio playing low. Someone had already been inquiring about what it would cost to turn it into something else. Earl, Judith said, I'm here. You're not imagining things. I hadn't known until that moment that I'd still been wondering. That some part of me had still been second-guessing myself, telling myself that maybe I was too sensitive, too old, too alone to be reading things accurately. That one sentence from Judith closed the door on all of that. The movers finished at 3:30. My belongings would go into a storage unit in the East End, temporarily while things sorted themselves out. I'd already arranged to stay with Felix Corda. We'd worked together at Dofasco before we both retired in the same year, within 3 months of each other. He lived alone in a small house in Dundas, complained constantly about the property taxes, and wouldn't hear of me staying anywhere else. Before I left, I walked through the house one last time. The rooms looked different, not empty exactly, exposed. The walls where photos had hung showed pale outlines where the frames had been. The bedroom felt larger without the cedar chest. The sitting room felt hollow without Dorothy's chair. The movers hadn't taken pieces of the house. They'd revealed what was actually there. I locked the front door, got in the car, drove. I was at Felix's kitchen table eating pasta e fagioli when my phone began to vibrate. 5:47. Curtis calling. Then, again. Then, again. I counted 17 missed calls by 7 o'clock. Felix brought me a glass of water and sat across from me without comment. He had very settled feelings about when to speak and when not to. One of the things I'd always valued about him. At 7:20, I finally answered. Dad. Curtis's voice was stripped of its usual careful neutrality. Where are all your things? I moved them. Silence, long enough that I heard him exhale. Why? The question genuinely surprised me. Not that he asked it, that he sounded confused. As if the previous 7 months hadn't happened. As if the yoga mat hadn't happened. As if Kijiji hadn't happened. Curtis, I said. Yeah. Do you remember the hockey game? A long pause. I waited. Yes, he said quietly. Good. That was all I said. We stayed on the line another moment. Then, very quietly, I should have said something. The honesty of it was unexpected, because it was the first honest thing I'd heard from him in a long time. We'll talk later, I said. Then I hung up. At 8:15, Vera called. Well, she said, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Rochelle's posted in the neighborhood Facebook group. I closed my eyes. Of course she has. She's described it as an unexpected family situation. Says you left without notice. What are people saying? Vera made a small sound. Earl, half this street, remembers you and Dorothy hosting that block party in 2008. Someone posted a photo of it 20 minutes ago. Someone else mentioned you rebuilt their fence after the ice storm 2 winters back and refused to take $1 for it. A pause. You can't rewrite 30 years with one Facebook post. People know. After we hung up, Felix poured us each a small glass of Canadian Club. We didn't talk much. We sat in the kitchen while the clock on the wall ticked and the streetlight came on outside the window. Some evenings don't need words. 2 days later, I agreed to meet them. Not because everything was resolved. Because avoiding the conversation indefinitely isn't a solution, and I've never been the kind of man who runs from difficult things. We met at Vera's house on a Saturday afternoon. Her living room, good chairs pulled into a loose circle, a pot of tea on the coffee table. Present, Vera and her husband Malcolm, Judith, Curtis, Rochelle, Felix, and me. Rochelle looked different from the woman who'd unrolled a yoga mat in my living room. Not angry, not composed. Uncertain in a way I hadn't seen before. She'd lost the easy confidence she usually carried. Judith opened the folder without ceremony. She laid out the contractor correspondence. The renovation permit inquiry submitted to the City of Hamilton. The preliminary drawings for the rear addition. The estimates for converting the bedroom. She also laid out printed pages from Kijiji. Curtis picked up the page with Dorothy's bread box. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. These are Mom's things, he said. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Rochelle. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the table. Then quietly, I was going to tell you. When? She didn't answer. Judith left the documents where they were and let the room do its work. After a long moment, Rochelle looked at me directly, for the first time in months. "I wasn't trying to erase you," she said. I waited. I was scared. She stopped, started again. "We couldn't afford anything. We still can't. Everything in Hamilton is just..." She shook her head. I kept thinking, what if Curtis's hours get cut more? What if my contract ends? What if we're renting forever? She pressed her hands together on her knees. And this house was just here. And it felt like it could be different, like it could be ours. The room was very quiet. I looked at her. She wasn't performing. The fear was real. I'd grown up in a time when a machinist could buy a house on Gage Avenue North and pay it off in 20 years. She'd grown up in a time when that was something close to mythology. That's not nothing. That gap is real, and it shapes people in ways they don't always understand about themselves. But fear, left unchecked, becomes entitlement. And entitlement is how you end up listing someone's grandmother's china on Kijiji for $40. "You were planning a future," I said carefully. "That didn't have me in it." She didn't deny it. Vera, who had been quiet the entire time, leaned forward slightly. "Rochelle, do you know what Dorothy told me once about Earl?" Rochelle looked up. "She said that man would give you his last dollar and then apologize for not having more." Vera paused. "The danger with people like that is that you start to expect it, and then you start to plan around it." Nobody spoke. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a photograph. The corners were worn soft from years of handling. It had been taken in the summer of 1991, the year we finished the back deck. Dorothy was standing on the new boards, squinting into the sun with a glass of iced tea, laughing at something I'd just said. Curtis was 6, sitting on the steps with a popsicle. I was holding a hammer I clearly had no remaining use for. I handed it to Curtis. He looked at it for a long time. Something crossed his face that I hadn't seen in years. Something younger. "I remember that summer," he said. "You ate 4 popsicles in one afternoon and were sick all night," I said. He laughed, small and sudden and real. Then he stood up and came across the room and hugged me, the way he used to when he was small enough that I had to lean down to reach him. Hard, without warning, without ceremony. "I'm sorry, Dad." His voice was not quite steady. I held on, just for a moment. Then I said what I'd come to say. "You need to find your own place." Neither of them argued. 60 days. I'll help with first and last if you need it. Curtis nodded. Rochelle nodded. There was grief in both their faces and something else underneath it. The relief of a pretense finally put down. 3 months later, I was sitting in my recliner on a Sunday afternoon, watching the Leafs lose in the usual fashion. The house was quiet. Not the heavy, directionless quiet that had followed Dorothy's death. Something different. The quiet of a place that belongs to itself again. Curtis and Rochelle had found a 2-bedroom apartment in Guelph. Reasonable commute for his warehouse job, cheaper than Hamilton, close to her sister. They'd moved on a Thursday in October, a rented U-Haul and a friend with a pickup truck. No drama, no final confrontation, just boxes and a handshake. And Curtis standing in the driveway afterward, with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking the way he always looked when he didn't know how to begin. "I don't know how to fix what happened," he said. "I know," I told him. "Where do we start?" I thought about it honestly. One Saturday at a time. Showing up, that's usually how. He nodded like he believed me, like he intended to try. He did. 3 Saturdays out of 4 he's been back. We replaced the storm door in November. The original had been swelling in its frame for 2 years. We insulated the garage workshop wall that had been cold since forever. We didn't talk about the 7 months. We just worked side by side, the way we used to when he was young and the house was new. And there was always something that needed doing. One afternoon, while we were cleaning out the eaves, he asked out of nowhere, "Was Rochelle wrong to be scared?" I thought about it long enough that he knew I wasn't dismissing it. "No," I said finally. "Fear is real. The housing market is real. Their situation was real." I adjusted my grip on the gutter. But fear doesn't give you the right to make someone invisible. He was quiet a moment. I should have stopped it earlier. You should have, I agreed. No point softening it. I didn't know what to do. I know, but doing nothing is still a choice. He nodded slowly. That was all we said about it. Sometimes the most important things don't need more than that. Dorothy's bread box was back on the kitchen counter. I'd messaged Rachel about the Kijiji listings the week after the meeting at Vera's. She'd taken them all down without being asked twice, brought everything back in 2 cardboard boxes, left them on the front step one morning without a word. I unpacked them carefully and put each thing back where it belonged. The oil painting from Alora was back on the hallway wall. The cross-stitch farmhouse was back beside the coat rack. The amber vase was back on the kitchen windowsill. The wingback chair was back by the front window, where it had always been. The only thing that was new was the piece of masking tape on the back of the remote. Felix had stuck it there the first time he came to visit after everything settled. Written in black permanent marker in his barely legible hand. Property of Earl. Other hands will be removed. He'd done it to make me laugh. I left it there anyway. Every time I saw it, something in me settled. Not because of the tape itself, because of what it stood for. A boundary small enough to seem silly, real enough to matter. I looked around the room. Dorothy's chair, her vase in the kitchen, her bread box, her painting, her cross-stitch, the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, exactly where it had always been. I hadn't won anything by taking things away from anyone. I'd won by refusing to let the important things be taken from me. And at 63 years old, sitting alone in a house I'd spent 35 years building, watching a hockey team break my heart the same way they always did, that felt like more than enough.